Hi, everyone. My name is Hananatu Tunis. I am the daughter of Merlin Valentine and Suleiman Tunis, the granddaughter of Rosalind T. Goodridge, and the great-granddaughter of Augustus Port, aka Pitu, and James Wilford Goodridge. So just thinking about my great-grandmother, first of all, I was raised heavily for the majority of my childhood by my grandmother, who a lot of people call Big Sister, Auntie Rose, but her full name is Rosalind Goodridge, and I was raised a large portion of my life by her, um, and I just remember living in the same house with her, Auntie Rose, and my great grandmother Pitu. It was amazing because they would talk in their dialect to each other. And I didn't, that wasn't really a memory until I started getting older and realizing that I was surrounding myself with um, other young African people or descendants who were so eager to go back to Liberia to learn not only Liberia, but to Ghana, to Nigeria, and for me, Liberia, to learn the language and to be a part of that culture. While many people were not wanting to go back home or not wanting to go to the motherland or Liberia or wherever because of things that they were hearing, I actually was running towards it. I wanted to learn more. And so one of the memories that really stands out is the last people in the family, the last time I heard anyone speaking, I think it was Pele. I could be mistaken, but the last time I heard it was Pele. The last time I heard that spoken was between my grandmother and my great grandmother. And I was so young, but I can hear them speaking to each other. And it just didn't, I guess the language, just the next generation, which would be my mother, they just didn't capture it for whatever reason, which is okay. But I am definitely one of those people who I would have loved to, if I was old enough, be asking my grandmother, what did you say? What did y'all just say? How do you say hello? Now I'm asking Basa people how to say hello, minute or something like that. So, yeah. So I think that's one of my fondest memories of my great grandmother and my grandmother just speaking the dialect together. Um, I would say my favorite memory from my grandmother that's top of mind is because she raised me for so long and I was away from my mother for so long. She played the role as a mother to all of us. So I remember I think it was like a performance or a talent show or Mother's Day. It was a Mother's Day performance at my elementary school. And my grandmother walked from the house to the performance to come and see me perform. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I've never really seen my grandmother cry. She always just reflected this woman of like, not to say crying is not strong, but at the time as a young girl, she just always looked so regal to me. It's like nothing made her sad. I don't know what it was. Like at that time, she is just always, and I think I was about in elementary school. So she always just, whatever happened, she would just overcome it with such grace and power. And so when she came to my little old Mother's Day celebration that my mother couldn't make it to, because at the time my mother was in New York, my grandmother came, walked there, sat down, and even with the most poise and just exuding of strength, I saw her eyes get watery. I saw it, and she doesn't know this, and this is not something that she would be ashamed of, but as our mother at the time, we've seen this woman work 2, 3 jobs, right? I've never seen anything as much as a needle hurt her, nothing. And then, she comes to my Mother's Day celebration, sits down, and I just could see in her eyes started to turn red. And I feel like she got emotional because it couldn't have been me because I don't think I was dancing that well. But I think that she just was proud at that moment. I think that I never asked her why. I was so young, but I know that she felt emotional and she felt good. My grandmother was very strict growing up, raising me. I literally had to have the mother call her if I wanted to sleep over someone's house. No boys calling the house, nothing like that. But I think that the one thing I've taken away from my grandmother is her her boldness in Christ. And I see a lot of myself in her. You know, in the family, we all have people that, yeah, we have the physical DNAs, but we all have people that we are like personality wise. And I definitely see the charismatic personality that my grandmother has in me. My grandmother is very straightforward. She doesn't sway away from the word, whereas people think the word is archaic. She still brings life to it. And so for me, as I'm getting older, one thing I've learned is who Jesus Christ is to me. I've learned faith. It's very faith-based between me and my grandmother. And that's something that I can't, it's a part of me. It's a part of my DNA. So one thing I've learned is how to be sure, how to be firm, and don't allow the world to sway you in other directions. Know who your God is, live by that, speak by it. So in elementary school and middle school, growing up in Providence, the school that I went to, literally, I think maybe over 50% of the students there were Liberian, actually. So I learned a lot about my culture, yeah, in the household, because what we ate, the way I heard my grandmother speaking, again, my grandmother and my great grandmother speaking the dialect, and then hearing the accent and the food and the culture, I knew that Liberia was special. I just didn't know exactly where my family came from at that time, at that age. And then in Providence, as you know, Providence, close to Staten Island and Philadelphia, and now Minnesota, they held a large percentage of Liberians. So even if you didn't know your culture, no matter where you went, you knew there were Liberians and you knew there was a country called Liberia. So, and as time went on, then I started to do my research. I started to learn more about Liberian history and where my family fits into that. So yeah, not too much about Coastville, but I knew that the Liberian culture was special because I was being raised in it. I was being brought up in it. But yes, so I've been to, my goal is to go to all West African countries as soon as possible. But right now I have I've been to Liberia several times. And that is because no one forced me to go. I didn't have to go for work or anything. It's only because of the love that I have for the people there. And again, the way how life works is it works like this. You know, as a child, as I mentioned before in the other question, um, I didn't really seek to understand the Liberian culture as a child. I mean, I'm a child, right? But as I got older, I was definitely interested in this small nation. Um, and then learning about the history of it. So learning that there were people there before that nation, that soil was Liberia. There were people there. And then you have the Black American slaves who came, traveled there, and landed there under the Monroe administration of the United States. So a lot of things started to make sense to me. You have these people coming from one home to another, meeting people who are already there. But what was fascinating was that the Black American slaves that came from the States are the ancestors of our family in a way. And well, some members of our family or some portions of our family, and then you have Barbados, us coming in. So you have these different people coming in from different nations and settling. And that to me just opened up a whole thing. I wanted to know more about Liberia. I wanted to go and learn about the people. I was tired of hearing about who Liberia was from the States. So I traveled to Liberia several times, I think about 5 times now, especially for mission work. And then I've gone to Senegal, I've gone to Ghana. I wouldn't say Guinea-Bissau, I just went through in the airport. But I've also been to Morocco up north there. And with all the different cultures, I don't know, Liberia is always gonna be, Liberia is always gonna be my home. So yeah, culture shock. First, I want to note here that the first time I went to Liberia, I was a solo traveler. Actually, all the times I've gone, I've always traveled by myself. But the first time I went, I immediately connected with Magdala Cooper. she was my mentor at the time. So I was able to travel with her because she was just happened to be going at the same time. But the moment I landed in Liberia, it was nighttime and the lights, the street lights were off. And I just remember feeling scared. I was wondering how the driver was going to do this. I mean, just picture landing in JFK and you have to get home and there are no street lights. It's hard to imagine that because we are raised in a society where there are street lights, right? But when I landed in Liberia, first of all, that was 2012. So there was no new airport. It was our old airport. Got there and it was a whole, that when I landed, I realized that I was in Africa. I didn't realize that I was doing this when I was on the plane. I realized it hit me when I landed and I was like, oh my gosh, like I am in Liberia, the Liberia that when I was in Providence and Staten Island, you meet so many Liberians and you can't put a face to the nation. You know, I mean, not a face to the nation, but you can't think about the nation the way everyone remembers it because everyone who I know, all of the adults, my mom, her friends, they're all from Liberia. So I've never really had the opportunity to know what it looks like. But Enter Shireen, when I got there, no lights at the airport. It was nighttime, we're driving, and the driver is like, that was the reality. That was their life. So they know how to maneuver because that's what they're used to. But yeah, that was my first experience. It was a huge culture shock. I think there's two things. I think the experience taught me a lot of things, but I think I'll just weigh in on two things. The first thing is humility. So when you are, especially for me, living in New York for so many years, for over 20 years, you get used to things happening when you need them to happen. You call an Uber, it comes when you need it to come. If it says it's 5 minutes away, it's gonna be here in 5 minutes. If it's gonna take you an hour to get somewhere, that's how long it's gonna take you. The expectations of us here in the States are higher because this is what we know. Our society is very different. So we can ask for something instantly and get that instant gratification. Whereas in Liberia and in other countries that are developing, things move a bit slower. And, you know, you can't expect, your expectations can't be as high. Why? Because you ask someone to give you a ride somewhere, if you have a driver or you have somebody helping you out, you have to understand that they don't have access to too many things. Maybe gas runs out, or maybe they need to fix their car, or whatever the case may be, because they just don't have that much access and resources. So that now forces you to be humble. My first 1 Million Girls event, I was late because the person who I depended on was late in arriving to come and get me and my materials. And at that moment, you know, you just kind of have to swallow it because this is the reality. Things are not going to happen the way in which you want it to happen because of the lack of resources, dependability, and lack of accountability. So that was one of the things that I learned. You got to go there being humble. I even told a friend who's going soon, just go there, be humble, and go with the flow. This is not like the States. So you have to be able to, if you're going to go to Liberia or any other developing country, you have to be able to be uncomfortable. Be uncomfortable. If you have to sleep on the floor, if you have to bathe from a bucket, if you have to do things that you don't usually do, that's all a part of living in a developing nation that doesn't have much access to resources. So the many times I've gone there, I've had to really learn that. And I think the second thing would be knowing that sometimes poverty is in the mind. You know, we have a nation who, after years and years of civil war, here we are in 2021. And I told you I've been there 2012, 2013, 2018, and I think 2021. I'm missing a year. But in all of those times I've gone, the only real changes that I've seen in Liberia are the fact that there are more entertainment spaces, more clubs, more lounges, more places to have a good time. And that is okay, but it's hard to see the same communities being in the same, not only state of community or physical state, but mental state, because people are really just in Liberia trying to make it work, trying to get what they can get. So it's not only when you go to Liberia, it's not only, oh, the poverty is so high, it's also affecting their minds. So I'm curious to see how the leaders in Liberia are going to not only put a stop to certain things or reduce the level of poverty we have, but how they're going to attempt to change the mental mindset of the people. So that's what I've been seeing when I go there. 1 Million Girls is literally my baby. It is a nonprofit organization headquartered in New York, where we are training young leaders in Africa, young women to become change agents and leaders in their communities in West Africa. We have a 1 Million Girls chapter in Liberia and Ghana that we're overseeing right now. But we are basically training these girls through virtual programming and through in-person programming how to be the change agents they want to see in their communities. So for example, we have young leaders in Liberia who are helping other young women in their community to get access to education, to get access to menstrual hygiene products. So we coach these girls and mentor them to be the light that they want to see in their communities. We also have a project called PADS, P-A-D-S, which stands for Prepared and Driven for Success. And that came out of the response of girls missing out on several school days because they don't have something as simple as a pad to prepare them for their periods. And this is not just a Liberian issue. This is a global issue. There are girls in communities around the world who literally do not feel comfortable going to school because they don't have resources. So back when I was in college, I said this is unacceptable, and I started getting my community involved. We got pads, and that was actually my first mission trip to Liberia. And so out of that mission trip, 1 Million Girls just took off. We became more than an organization helping girls to get access to menstrual hygiene supplies, but we do menstrual hygiene management workshops. At this time, we're teaching girls how to make their own pads, so that way they don't have to go out and buy it. So girls in rural communities who have cloth, who have needle, who have thread, they can now make their own pads for themselves and even become micro entrepreneurs and sell what they make. It's so nice to meet all of you. There's many of you, but I think it's important that you get an opportunity to say your name just as I introduce myself. So thank you. So let's get into it. Can anyone tell me, so your teacher Ade has been telling me that, Miss Ade has been telling me that you've been learning. Okay, louder, louder. Oh, nice, welcome. Oh, hello. Okay, let's see who can be the loudest. That's pretty much what we're doing now. It's a full-blown organization. And again, we have chapters in Ghana and Liberia. When I was in college, well, even prior to college, I used to participate in a lot of pageants. And so while I was I participated in Miss Liberia in the US. So I actually have the title of Miss Liberia in the US 2008. And then I participated in Miss Africa USA. And during the Miss Africa USA pageant, in all of these pageants, you have to have a platform. You have to have a mission. And so during that time, I think that my mission started to become clear. And it was to empower young women. But when you say empower young women, that's a vision statement. You know, we can all say we want to do this, but the mission is very important. The mission is the one that says how you're going to do that. So I started getting very into just the United Nations work. At the time, I was working at the Liberian consulate. So I started learning more about Liberia because you had Liberian diplomats working right next to me. And so that was amazing. So I just feel like God was just placing me. See, what happens is when you have a vision and a mission, it's not like science. When you're called to do something, things start to fall in line with what you're supposed to do. So take it back to pageantry. This can be a timeline too. I started participating in pageants, And then I started to have a passion for young women. And then during my speech at the Miss Africa USA pageant, I was like, I want to give girls pads for Christmas. This was 2010, 2 years before my first trip in Liberia. Then I started going on. I got an internship with the Liberian consulate that turned into a full-time job right after college. Working with my Liberian bosses were just, it opens up a whole nother idea or concept or reality of what Liberia was. As a matter of fact, I always say this, my direct supervisor, the vice consul at the time at the Liberian consulate, her accent, her Liberian accent was the first of its kind that I've heard. For the first time I was hearing, because there's so many different layers of the accent. So I would see, I mean, this woman just exuded so much professionalism, and she would come, and some people try to hide the Liberian accent, and it was just so beautiful to me. So I learned so much about that, and then took my trip to Liberia, and then just started getting connected with people who did international work. So now I came from being this person who just wanted to give pads to being intentional about sustainability, international relations, global development. What does that look like? So honestly, I think I was always supposed to do this work, but it took some time for me to know, wow, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be traveling. I'm supposed to be meeting people outside of my comfort zone and making an impact. I feel like back then there was especially on Staten Island, let me use Staten Island as an example. In the community we grew up with, there was a big distinction between Black Americans and Liberians, because Staten Island at one point held the largest population of Liberians outside of Liberia at one point. I think maybe other cities have one now, but at one point, so you had a huge distinction, and there used to be friction. I believe there used to be friction. And so at that time too, I think growing up, you didn't really, like being Liberian or being African in general, it seemed to be a stigma growing up. But today is a bit different. Today, you have more young Africans, or society for some reason, like they see Africans as the African culture is just on a pedestal to them. I don't know what the changes in trend was. Maybe they think it's trendy, but I say all that to say it's easier now to show up as the full-bred African you are, even in American spaces. I see that even with myself. So when I'm asked to introduce myself at work or in a new space that people don't know me, I actually say I'm Liberian first. So I take the nation of my family history first, and then I say I was born in Providence, you know, so I kind of like to capture what that is first. So for me, I show up whether it's values or what we say or what we do, I show up as a Liberian and as a descendant of Liberia. Even amongst my other friends from different African nations, I have a lot of Nigerian friends, Ghanaian friends, and they love hearing the Liberian accent. They love it. They even try, you know, so it's like I just love it. I love the nation. So wherever I go, Liberia is definitely something that I wear and I represent. I love beans tobagi. Beans tobagi is my favorite. I know a lot of people say cassava leaf, but beans tobagi is my favorite. I love. So one of the things I noticed growing up and that I hold dearly to my heart are Thanksgiving mornings in the Liberian household. So whereas plantain, edo, cassava, and gravy is lunch for some, we can eat that for breakfast. And I learned that growing up. So while they were making Thanksgiving dinner, my grandmother and all of the elders were making Thanksgiving breakfast as well. And that breakfast was a plantain and gravy. So plantain and gravy for breakfast, spot on. What else? A couple of sayings I think I enjoy. People say that I speak Cerise, but I can do my colloquia here and there. So, so I like, let me see, what do I say a lot? Oh, I love how we always say "se" after everything. So I will not go there, "se." Or she didn't even say that, "se." I love that we add that to everything. I also have a couple of my Nigerian friends saying that too. Um, yeah, that I think that's there's so much, there's so many, but those are the things that are top of mind right now. One of the things that I'm learning, and I'm still learning, by the way, of how to build a successful career or business or whatever it is that you're trying to make successful, but humility. If you go into a space and you feel like you know everything, it's going to be hard for you to learn. So even my 23-year-old self versus my 33-year-old self, what I know now is very different. But when I was 23, going to Liberia, I was okay with failing fast. So without even ever going to Liberia, I hopped on a plane. I wasn't afraid of what would happen. So you can't just be, you can be aware. You don't have to be like, what is the word I'm looking, impulsive, but you also shouldn't be afraid to just go after that. And so failing fast and being humble to learn new things and learn where things can be better. We don't know everything, and even the oldest person can still learn something. So the next time I go to Liberia, which is going to be very, very soon, hoping to actually go next month, I want to really visit, like, usually when I go to Liberia, it's for mission work and I stay in the city. I never really get the opportunity to explore outside. As a matter of fact, the last time I was just there in June, there was like this large space of time a friend and I had where we didn't have any work, nothing. And we didn't want to go all the way back near the airport where we were staying. So we're like, what can we do in the city? And someone was just like, nothing, there was a museum, but apparently it wasn't open. So I would like to go to more places where I can explore Liberia more, explore where our family comes from more. I want to go to the spaces where my mother was raised, my grandmother was raised. I don't want to just stay in the city, which is what I typically do because of the mission work. So going back to Liberia, I want to have a plan. I want to go to outside. I want to drive to counties I've never been before and go to Kosovo. I want to visit and see that area because I've never been. I think the generation coming up, specifically Generation Z, as I mentioned before, the language even was lost. Like the language wasn't even trickled down to our parents. So, and language is a part of culture. But even though that didn't trickle down, there's still elements of our culture that we can carry. The food we eat, our dialect, and not dialect, but the way we speak our Liberian English in itself. But I think that the way we can honor our the people who came before us and our culture is by having those conversations with the older people. And this to me, like having this interview is honoring my grandmother and my great grandmother. Maybe traveling to Liberia, but even if you don't want to travel, maybe investing into Liberia. So that is a way that, and I think I'll end right there with that question. How do we invest in the country our parents came from or our grandparents came from? Like, how do we do that? Is it by picking a nonprofit organization, partnering with an orphanage, or maybe an orphanage in Crosserville, maybe partnering with them? There's so many ways to connect, and there are ways to send money. In 2012, we can only do MoneyGram or Western Union. Now you have apps like World Remit and Sendwave, where you can connect with people and maybe people who you trust to invest in places to build up Liberia. So I think the way we can truly honor our nation and the people who came before us is by investing in our country. Don't just take a look back and say, oh, Liberia, this is what I heard about it. Oh, I heard that the people are this. Oh, I heard it's like this. Liberia needs us, this generation. They need us to pour into it if it's going to be a better nation. So invest. There is a reason why we are Liberians. Like, there's a reason why I was born in this family. And so I take purpose and vision and mission very seriously. So anyone who's watching this, if you are Liberian or you are descendant of Liberia and you want to do something meaningful for the country, don't be afraid to go back. Don't be afraid to see for yourself and to learn more about this country. Liberia is not just a country of American soil. Liberia is its own culture. It is its own space. It is a nation of beautiful people, beautiful culture, wonderful food. We have the best jollof. Everything is fine. So go back and see for yourself, but also try to be a part of the solution. What can you do to build up Liberia?